If somebody still wants a diet, I tell them to follow, the Mediterranean diet, because of all diets, it kind of has balance. And maybe I didn't really answer your question. With respect to animal models, we are not rats or mice or pigs, probably closest to monkeys.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. V, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. And as a performance and longevity expert, I like to include other experts in to really widen your breadth and knowledge in this longevity space. And that's who I have as a guest today. Now, before I introduce my next guest, if you are new to the podcast, welcome in. This is a place where I bring in thought leaders from all around the world in the fields of science, longevity, business, relationships, peak performance, and human potential to give you the tools to elevate yourself into the Thrive state. If you are a returning listener and if this podcast has helped you at all in any way, please do us a favor to help this podcast grow by leaving a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, pick up a copy of my book, Thrive State, at thrivestatebook.com. And if you are excited about longevity, if you're excited about being the best version of yourself and you are new to my world, I want to give you a free bonus. You can go visit thrivestatestarter.com. There I have a free ebook for you. I've got some breathwork exercises to really get you in states of calm and energy and focus. All those things free at your fingertips at thrivestatestarter.com. And now on to today's guest. As a longevity doctor, sometimes you find yourself in a silo because of so many traditional and conventional methods that are out there that sometimes you feel like you're alone. But fortunately, I think in the longevity space, there are true pioneers that are pushing the bounds of what we know as conventional medicine to really be able to get people to live longer, to biologically reverse their age, and to perform and to live a life, to not only live longer, but to bring more life into the years that are lived. And my guest today is a pioneer in this field. She is Dr. Florence Comite, a clinician scientist and innovator in the field of precision medicine. She is world-renowned for her expertise in predicting, preventing, and reversing chronic disease and the disorders associated with aging. In 2005, Dr. Comite actually founded the Center of Precision Medicine and Health, located on Park Avenue South, where she practices a clinically proven academic approach to personalized healthcare structured as a clinical trial. By interpreting genomic, metabolic, phenotypic, and digital health data, the center provides clients with predictive analyses and individualized action plans to help them look and feel younger, stronger, and healthier, and remains active well into their 90s and beyond. Dr. Comite has published original research in dozens of clinical journals and a sought-after keynote speaker around the world. She is the Amazon best-selling author of Keep It Up, The Power of Precision Medicine to Conquer Low T and Revitalize Your Life. She is a true disruptor to the status quo, also known as a doctorpreneur with a bold mission to eliminate chronic disease in the world. That is something that both of us share. She has begun by helping her clients lengthen their health spans to match their lifespans at their center, which is actually now expanded to offices in Palo Alto and Miami Beach. And now she's applying her research to a virtual medicine app called Grok Health. You can find more at grokhealth.com. That's GROQ health.com, which is bringing access to the transformative power of personal precision medicine to everyone's smartphone. So ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Florence Comite. Dr. Florence Comite, welcome to the Thrive State Podcast.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Oh, it is a pleasure. The longevity circle is small, and it's great to be able to place a face and an energy, the name of somebody who has been such a pioneer in the longevity space. Now, before we dive into the podcast, and there's so much to learn from you, there is a segment of the show called the 5 to Thrive. My audience knows it well. 5 quick questions, 1,000 points each. And here's the cool thing. If you win the 5 to Thrive, you get a healthy meal on me the next conference we happen to bump into each other. So my question to you, Dr. Florence, are you ready to play the 5 to Thrive?
Absolutely.
Okay. Question number 1 is, if you had one word to describe your 2023, what would that be?
Tired.
Question number 2, 1,000 points there. Question number 2 was, as a child, what did you dream of growing up to become?
A doctor.
Oh, wow. You got that one. Question number 3 was there a book, a thought, a quote, a mindset shift that happened to you any point of your life that it allowed you to pivot or have a new epiphany? What quote, book, or insight would that be?
The insight was understanding I could read data or biomarkers and attach it to somebody's health story way beyond the cheap complaint that we usually think of to predict people's future health trajectory. That was a huge epiphany over 20 years ago at Yale.
Wow, that's amazing. 3,000 points so far. 2 more questions to go. Question number 4 is, what is one New Year's resolution here in 2024 that you look forward to manifesting into your life?
Joy. I want more joy in whatever time there is that I can experience joy.
That's beautiful. And last question for you, for the last 1,000 points, would be, how does Dr. Florence want to be remembered?
For handing the gift of health to every human being on the globe.
That's beautiful. Thank you for doing the work that you do. And thank you for joining our podcast, sharing your wisdom here. Now, we want to dive in deep into your work in longevity. And, some people are a little bit confused as to what the term biological age versus chronological age is, and our ability to actually reverse our biological age. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to biological age and our ability to reverse it?
Absolutely. I love the question. To me, aging is happening all the time. I was never a fan of anti-aging, for example, because I'm pro-aging, but in great health. And it occurred to me that as we hit our 30s, our systems began to decline under the surface. And as I looked at each human being I was taking care of, it was, why are we waiting to treat their diseases when it's already evident, even if they don't know they're experiencing it? There's no real symptoms. Why do we wait to be reactive and jump all over somebody when they're really sick? But it's brewing under the surface for decades, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, cancer, you know that well. And so for me, aging begins when our cells get old, not the number of candles, that's chronological aging. But biological aging is when our cells begin to decline and we are not aware of it until you see an outward manifestation, because that's conventional medicine, at least in the US. You have to get sick, you have to have a chief complaint, and then we'll jump all over you. Where my way of thinking is beyond prevention. It's how do you get precise data to point out and be proactive, working with a human being as a guide and a partner, not in the traditional paternalistic or maternalistic medical world, but how do you change the course of someone's future health so biologically their cells stay young and healthy, even as they age to over 100, they can do all that they want to do.
That's beautiful. Now, I know there's a lot of testing that's out there. What is your take? There is one person in particular who's a multimillionaire who spends a lot on, doing, every biohacking technology there is out there, doing a lot of tests. What is your take on his method in trying to preserve his biological age?
Dr. V, I know exactly who you're talking about. Happy to mention Brian Johnson. I'm not exactly sure, except I do follow some of the things he says. I believe that there is a way to do this. Exactly how he's living life, though, would not be my first choice, nor would I do with my clients, AKA patients, but I don't want them sick, so they become clients. Not in academia. In academia, they remain patients because I don't want to get my head handed to me, as you probably well know. And God forbid we call them customers. That's like no-go, right? So it turns out, and I was unaware of this until I was told by the folks we work with to look at biological aging, which is standard, omic age. I don't know if you're familiar with the new way to look at biological aging, not just chronological aging, but biological. Are you familiar with the latest data on that? That goes beyond the Duane pace and the other ways of looking at aging that Stephen Horvath actually discovered initially.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yes, and I know the people over at True Diagnostic has helped, really, continue to pioneer some of that work onto their latest assays as well.
It's fantastic. We've actually done work with them, and I published with them through COVID. We had some very interesting findings on aging. If you were under 50, over 50, and you got COVID, that probably involves the immune system, is our thinking. So it was Ryan himself, who was one of the founders of True Diagnostic, who came to me and said, listen, you have more people than anyone in the world. I'd like you to agree to post your patients on this list. And it turns out that in terms of reversing biological aging, we're 25% of the leaderboard, and we're 20% of absolute age. And the ages range in my clientele from the teens to the 90s, and the group of people who made it on were 15 to the 70s. And so I'm very delighted. It was an independent analysis. I decided to go ahead and do it. We're listed as private participants, although some of my more competitive people want their names there. I feel a little that, do you really want that notoriety? But some people do, so we're debating it. Also, he hasn't gone through the hundreds, if not thousands of tests that we've done to reassess using omic age. So I'm looking forward to having way more people on the top 20 list. So right now we have 5 out of 20, and there's no one who even has 2. That includes Brian himself. So he's on the list, but in a couple of places, our folks beat him out. So I think that methodically looking at aging from a data-driven, which is why I always called it precision medicine and healthy longevity, is really where the game is at. Because if you can figure out the data scientifically and proactively, you can change the course of somebody's aging, biological aging, and keep them healthy for life.
Yeah, we talked a little bit just now on using, omic clocks. What additional biomarkers are you finding are probably, maybe some of the standard things that are suggesting strong correlations with biological age?
That's a great question, Dr. V. To start with, I believe we have to look at carbohydrate metabolism. Here's my bias. Every single one of us has abnormal glucose metabolism as we age, and some of us even show it in our teens and childhood, particularly those at risk for metabolic syndrome, PCOS in women, and I've seen all sorts of versions of that in men and women and children. My training spans pediatric endocrine, adult endocrine, women's health and men's health, or gynecology and andrology. And so I was lucky enough to work in pediatric endocrine at NIH and Yale, reversing puberty, which is obviously goes right along with where I ended up. And then I created women's health at Yale in the 1990s. And immediately after that, the women wanted to bring in their male partners. And so men's health grew very rapidly, particularly as I transitioned to New York about 15 years ago. And so the carbohydrate metabolism is vital because that is one of the homeostasis ways our body keeps our health and is involved in every degree of disease. So if somebody becomes a diabetic, and I call it something else right now, then they're not going to stay healthy. And unfortunately, aging conspires to make us all diabetics at one stage or another. You could be 30, you could be 90. Because as you lose muscle and you don't have a way to pack away sugar, you're going to change the way you metabolize and distribute sugar. And if you don't have enough muscle because testosterone falls, so hormones are also critical. In particular, I put testosterone at the top of the list. And the last vital piece to me, is lipid metabolism. If you start with just a handful of those biomarkers, which look at carbohydrates, look at lipids, and look at hormones, you're going to get almost a complete answer there, particularly in the face of marrying it to what I think of biomarkers in your health story. How do you sleep? What's your food intake like? What's your exercise? What about meditation and, restorative practices? How does that factor in? What about relationships? And socialization? Are you close to your family, or do you have a lot of friends? Are you able to maintain a quality of life that feeds your health? That's really important.
Oh, absolutely. All those elements are part of the pillars in the Thrive state. Let's get a little bit more specific on these biomarkers. When you're looking at sugar metabolism, or you're looking at fasting insulins, hemoglobin A1Cs, or are you diving in deeper with other biomarkers that you're looking at in terms of sugar metabolism?
So now you're probing a little deeper. And while some of it's confidential, I can lead with the 5 top biomarkers that I think every human being should have. And you should start at least in your 20s to get a sense of when we're at the peak of optimal health, what do we look like? And we know from athletes and others that 27 or 25 to 30, because it's not precise for every single person, even my identical twin and I are different. And that was part of my epiphany 20 years ago and why I went with metabolism and dynamic change, because I knew genetics wasn't ready for prime time and my twin and I were different.
Yeah.
So the 5 top biomarkers to me are fasting sugar, fasting insulin, and hemoglobin A1C. In addition to that, I look at cholesterol biomarker, particularly the ratio of total cholesterol and HDL, or high density lipoprotein, along with free testosterone. Because free testosterone is far more meaningful, as I'm sure you know from what I've watched about your work, far more meaningful than total, which is bound up in protein. So if each and every one of your listeners can ask their physicians or their clinicians to get these biomarkers, that combination gives you tremendous insight into your future risk of diseases like heart attack, stroke, Alzheimer's, cancer, osteoporosis. All of that will factor in.
Got it. What is your take on ApoB?
ApoB is a great substitute for, looking at fasting levels of cholesterol, particularly LDL, but it isn't a perfect combination. But again, I have not found anything in medicine to be precise. We actually draw blood sometimes and send them to different labs, and the correlation is very poor. In fact, I did an interesting test on myself as a clinical researcher. I actually, a few years ago, drew twice the amount of tubes, and I draw a lot of tests. So it's not just 5, we're talking hundreds. So there were 70 tubes, and I labeled it with my twin sister's name, who's Harriet Comite, the smarter twin. She's a dermatologist, and my name. And we sent them to the exact same labs. Do you know the numbers were different? And so there's no other way I can prove. And so that what we actually look at are trends. How's your body changing over time? That's why I recommend that we start looking in your 20s, because in your 20s, your body is still putting down bone. You're still maturing and changing, but you're heading towards optimal. And then it's all over when you hit your 30s. So that's where the decline begins, unless we could stop it in its tracks and reverse it.
Yeah, you bring about a very important topic here, which is hormone health and hormone optimization. Where do you find, we find that over time that particularly in men, the decreases of testosterone has occurred much, much earlier in age and seems to be falling at a more rapid rate. Certainly lifestyle has a lot to do with it. What is your take on optimizing hormones both in men and women? And when should people start considering it?
That's a complex question. A lot of times when I get stopped at a meeting, particularly for women, it's, can you just give me a little bit about women? Like, can you just give me some guidelines? And all I'll be able to say is really every woman is unique. The fun part of it is in my work and studies, and we just submitted an abstract today to the Endocrine Society about combination use of 2 different peptides, which I can get into if you're interested, is that the men have a more linear regression of their health, particularly testosterone. They start with a fall due to the fact that the negative feedback loop isn't operational as effectively in their 30s as it was in their 20s, and certainly declines with each decade of life at different rates for different men. So by looking at that combination and looking at free testosterone and the relationship between that and the pituitary hormones, LH and FSH, what we found, and I published this in the Endocrine Society 10 years ago in 2013, in 262 men, it was secondary hypogonadism, meaning Testosterone that was circulating was low, but the brain wasn't paying attention. And the part of the brain that has to pay attention is the part that you know well, the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus, gives a message to the pituitary, which is sometimes considered the third eye, but really isn't the master gland. It's the hypothalamus. And what was happening is circulating testosterone was low. And in today's world, we don't get enough sleep. We're constantly active, particularly on both coasts, if not in the middle of the country. And that we pay a big price for how difficult the challenges of regular life are. And then you have a child or two and you're working really hard. And that's why in your 30s, you see these effects. But it becomes increasingly clear the role that hormones play when I look at people that have severe diseases, particularly cardiometabolic disease like early heart attack or stroke, when they have a parent who's died in their 60s after starting to experience in their 30s or 40s multiple heart attacks or strokes, their numbers, particularly testosterone, is low, even at 30 to 35. They resemble men who are 50 to 55. Now, again, men are unique. There are some men at 70 who are in twice as good shape as men at 35. So it's very individualized, but it tends to be a linear drop-off, where in women, it's not quite the case. We hit a wall at about 50, but for the 10 years prior to that, our body is in flux. And there's what we call perimenopause, which affects women dramatically because it can be anything from not having periods to feeling uncomfortable and having periods too often. Some women even think they're going through the change of life, and for the first time, they've gotten pregnant in their mid-40s, and they never knew it because they had trouble getting pregnant. There's a whole profile of women like that, which I remember prior to reproductive endocrine tools, who would show up and at 40, 45, they'd have a baby for the first time. And that's another unusual path that we still really haven't made sense of.
Yeah, I find that this is something that is on the forefront, but I think there's still barriers to people, adopting hormone replacement therapy. Two of them being concerns about cardiovascular issues with clotting, and then certainly cancers. Can you at least speak to them so that, somebody is not so adverse to seeking a hormone expert to take on replacement or to consider replacement?
So love the question. And let me make sure I got the three parts of it. One is concern about cardiovascular. The second was worry about cancer. That was the third. And the middle one?
Yes, it was. Oh, yeah. It was part of the cardiovascular. It was just clotting issues.
Clotting. Okay. That's the easiest one to handle. So back in the day when estrogen and progesterone came out as birth control pill, the doses for estrogen were quite high. This is what freed up the hippie generation, right? So in the 60s, women were free of worrying about pregnancy if they took birth control pills. But unfortunately, oral estrogen and high doses have a first pass through the liver, and they actually can negatively impact lipids, cholesterol, but also increase clotting. And so that was a fear because strokes would happen. That doesn't happen in today's world. If you study someone's makeup and you make sure you look at their clotting parameters, and we use very low doses. So the way we usually give hormones to women would be by cream, particularly estrogen and testosterone, orally for progesterone, because as it turns out, progesterone is very protective of the brain, cognition. It even helps with sleep. I use progesterone in men where sleep is really elusive and the change is dramatic.
Yeah.
The other factor I'll move into is cardiometabolic. And that's a great question. And I will say that I have never used the term hormone replacement, just like I've never given insulin to anyone who's a diabetic. I think of insulin as negative. If you can reverse diabetes, I'm not talking about type 1, I'm talking about type 2, you actually way ahead. So I've always been able, I'll say 99% of the time, I'm always able to reverse diabetes in someone who's emerging, whether it's pre-diabetic or diabetic, by looking at all those variables. But we use the term hormonal optimization, where I see it has become pretty popular now, but I've used it for over 20 years. So yes, I'm a pioneer, although I don't want the arrow, I want the land. So you know that term, pioneers get the arrows, the settlers get the land. because people come in behind you to do the work and you've done all the studies, right? So having said that, we hormonally optimize because I'm not Mother Nature. And I know Mother Nature gives us a lot, but Father Time strips it. And I feel like there's a risk-benefit approach to taking care of people where you want to maximize the benefit and minimize the risk. And that's how we work in clinical research, where we're looking at ways to get the best out of giving someone a new drug or trying a new tool. But we also want to minimize risk, and there's always risk. So hormonal optimization in cardiometabolic, 99.999% is positive. So you can't say 100% in medicine because nothing's 100% and we don't know what we don't know. But in my experience and all the papers in the literature, think of it, the heart's a muscle. The brain benefits from estrogen and testosterone and progesterone with cognition and memory. So many of the hormones, I didn't mention thyroid even. That's critical. It's not just keeping our metabolism in order. It actually works to support menstrual cycles in women and heart rhythm and cognition and thinking and the GI tract and hair. So all of these hormones have an amazing impact on the way our system works.
I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you are, I just wanted to let you know, join our community. There's so many free resources and a great community of people that desire health, happiness, human potential, to have more in their life, more health, more energy. And when you have those two things together, you could create more happiness, more abundance, whether it be financial, romantic, all these things in your life. And if you're just starting out, you don't know where to go, just sign up for thrivestatestarter.com, because in there you're going to get a bundle of information that includes a longevity ebook, a longevity and performance resource guide, lecture notes that come from my keynotes at Google, at Fortune 500 companies, all the insights in that keynote in lecture slide form given to you. And then finally, breathwork. I share 3 powerful breathwork exercises to access calm, which really gives you clarity and peace during the day, to access energy if you need to wake up and really motivate yourself, and finally a breathwork routine that you could do every single morning so that you could be very intentional with how you create that day. You can find all this stuff delivered free to your inbox at thrivestatestarter.com. And our community is growing. If you want to be a part of a community of people that desire the Thrive State, that are really in Thrive State themselves and help other people along with that, you could be a part of the community. You can get group coaching from me. We do breathwork sessions, meditation sessions, and you also get to drop in and participate in podcasts in the future. You could find more about the community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. So check out those resources. You're not going to be disappointed. And please enjoy the remainder of this podcast.
Finally, when you talk about cancer, to me, the reverse is true in some ways. And when I first started with men, for example, and would increase their testosterone by using human chorionic gonadotropin, which is a peptide, not unlike Ozempic or tirzepatide, they're all peptides. And to me, peptides, which is where my fundamental research began at the National Institutes of Health, are a much safer path to take because they stimulate your body naturally, or let's say physiologically, to do what it's supposed to do anyway. So when you think of testosterone and increasing that, whether it's direct with testosterone or using HCG to stimulate, think about what happens in men. Let's use prostate cancer as an example. Men get prostate cancer when they're older in general, when testosterone's low, not when they're young men. In young men, testicular tumors can happen, but that peaks in the 20s. Whereas prostate cancer, you're looking at 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and yet testosterone's low and estrogen is high. So that was a very common question I faced from everyone when I first began. So it gets a lot deeper and more complex, but suffice it to say, supporting not just the cardiometabolic, but cognition, muscle, bone, muscle critical. It's the new fountain of youth. Most people don't think of it that way, but muscle helps to package sugar. It helps to keep you strong. It prevents bones from breaking because you're sturdy. So developing sarcopenia, which is low muscle, puts you at high risk. And that's why you can have all the protein in the world. You can work out and do resistance training, which is really important. If you don't have an adequate testosterone, you are not going to put on muscle the way you did when you were 18, 20, 25.
Let's talk a little bit about muscle in particular as we age, because there's certainly studies, and I want to get your take on this, of caloric restriction demonstrating increases in longevity in lab animals. Now, I am a pro-muscle person, and I believe the issues of sarcopenia in our elderly much surpasses and all the additional risks and morbidity involved in sarcopenia is much more prevalent than to let people know that caloric restriction is a good strategy for human beings. I wonder what your take is.
Let me talk about my biases. I'm biased. I don't like dieting. I don't like the term. I think it's a negative term. I think a lot of people react to it. So I believe in eating right for your body type. I don't know if you ever saw the book Color Me Beautiful, where you were spring, summer, winter, fall, and certain colors enhance your looks depending on your makeup.
Yeah.
I think about Color Me Healthy because each of us has a different body makeup, and food to some of us, fasting is fine for some people. Fasting too long or too much can be dangerous for some people. And fasting for some people can't happen at all because by 2-3 hours, they'll pass out. They become hypoglycemic. Their blood sugar falls, and they need to keep maintenance. They need to have something with protein, good fats, fiber, and carbs. So I am not a huge believer in restricting diet. Now, if somebody wants to try it, sure. Caloric restriction is fine to a degree, like, for example, maybe 8 hours to 10 hours or 12 hours a day. If your body can handle it, go to sleep at night. Don't eat anything for 2 hours before bedtime to let your immune system and your body go through the cascade of events it needs to heal, restore, refurbish the immune system, the hormones and all of that. Have your growth hormone released at night. Wake up the next day. If you can postpone breakfast until 10, 11, 12, great. Some people can't. I would say in my experience, more than 50% of people cannot do that. And so maybe there's another approach. Maybe you look at balancing the way you eat your food. And one of the well-known patterns to keep carbohydrate metabolism as healthy as possible is to start by eating protein and make sure that you're having protein, fiber, and healthy fats before you eat a carb at any time. But you need carbs. So there are great healthy carbs. So to me, sustaining any one particular way of eating can be hazardous to your health. And we've seen it with the use of Ozempic and some of the other GLP-1s and GIPs in combination, because people can't eat enough. And if they give up food and they don't eat adequately, they're going to get weaker and lose muscle. So I believe in fitting the nature of the way you eat to your body. If somebody still wants a diet, I tell them to follow, the Mediterranean diet, because of all diets, it kind of has balance. And maybe I didn't really answer your question. With respect to animal models, we are not rats or mice or pigs, probably closest to monkeys. And in my earlier research, which I mentioned in children with early puberty, we used a peptide called GnRH, which comes from the hypothalamus to stimulate the pituitary and turn the axis on for going through early puberty and regular puberty. And in those models, sometimes the rats developed cancers or calcium deposits. Never saw it in a human being. And some of that is attributed to the fact that the FDA requires 2 species studies when you're bringing any drug to market or any kind of new kind of intervention to be able to prove that it's above all safe. So that's part of the dilemma in looking at risk benefit and what should you do intentionally?
Yeah. Everybody is different. And what is the role you think genetics play these days? I mean, there's a lot there's a company out there called the DNA company that says that this blueprint and map can certainly give you a lot of information about your health moving forward. How important is it to know our genetics? Does it actually play a role, given that there's so much we can do with our life to change our epigenetics for our phenotype, for our longevity and performance? What is your take on genetic factors? Should we take genetic tests? And how do we move forward thinking about this?
I think genetic tests can be really useful. Let me use the notion of Coumadin when you have atrial fibrillation. In the old days, you needed to be in the hospital for 2 weeks to kind of ramp up the right dose for your body, depending on how you metabolize it. And the metabolization comes from the fact that our bodies methylate DNA at certain rates. Someone like Shaq O'Neal might need a little bit of a drug, even though he's humongous because of his genetics. And someone like Danica, who's the race car driver, who's tiny.
Danica Patrick?
Yes, exactly. She might need a humongous dose. And we see that all the time when people come and say, give me a little bit because I'm afraid I'll overreact. And other people say, oh no, throw it on me 3 times the dose because I'm not affected, right? And so when I started, as you can imagine, genetics was a big draw for me as an identical twin. I knew innately that epigenetics existed because my twin and I are different. I could live on sushi and sashimi, and she really doesn't like fish. She's an amazing gardener, and I kill plants. So we don't really align. But in a lot of ways, we look so much alike that sometimes if people have an eye for it, they will meet me and call me by my sister's name if they didn't know she even had a twin. Some people think we don't even look alike. So it's also, that's genetic. Your ability to discern facial features is actually genetic. One of my clients, just as an interesting digression, would bump into someone he worked with for 30 years in a mall, and he didn't recognize her because he didn't have that gene. So going back to genetics, it was always my desire to delve into genetics. And I think with regard to carrier states, for example, Tay-Sachs or cystic fibrosis, it could be life-saving if you believe in testing your eggs and embryos and creating babies that don't have cystic fibrosis or BRCA or Tay-Sachs. That's a huge weight off of parents' shoulders. On the other hand, it doesn't really give you the model to how you live life. And I waited for that. I thought it would take about 20 years, and I was almost right on the button there. I also thought this field would be in conventional medicine in 20 years. There, I was completely wrong. But at least it's emerging now, right? As we know, being longevity doctors, that genetics has come to a point where you can look at genetic variants and it could dictate what are you going to need when it comes to D, vitamin D, which is actually a hormone that we can no longer really absorb from the sun. We actually have to get it in food or in supplements, and food doesn't have enough of it. So that vitamin D, which is present in every cell, is essential for healthy bones, a healthy brain, healthy immune system. It's anti-cancer. It's good for the heart. And yet some people can't take over-the-counter D3 and convert it. And so they need ergocalciferol, which is D2 in a prescription, because they have a gene that doesn't let them methylate it. Conversely, there are folks who can't, or actually in a similar way, who can't convert thyroid or T4, free T4 to free T3 and drop that iodine. As a result, they need to take both T4 and T3. And a lot of doctors still don't believe that. But I see so many people who have adequate T4, which is the usual replacement using Synthroid, but their T3 is low and we have to give them Cytomel or a form of T3. So I think genetics is coming into its own, and we do look at genetic variants. And in fact, I think it drives the entire system. Can you modify your system? Absolutely. That's where sleep, eating the right kinds of food for yourself, but not suffering the way I think Brian suffers. Like, who wants to live life that long and eat one bowl of gruel every single day that has a certain chemical mixture? Not many of my patients would do that. Neither would I. It wouldn't be worth living the extra years because it would be torture. But anyway, besides that, when you look at these variants, you can determine the path people are on. So you can see if we can detoxify. How will we handle mercury? What? So it's an extrapolation of marrying the genetic variants to your metabolism, your hormones, and the way you live life. And that's how we approach it. So we're looking at all those variables.
Just getting these answers from you really just again, I don't want to use the word pioneer again. How would you say pioneer and conqueror of the longevity space? But you certainly,
Maybe a transformer. Maybe it's a transformer.
I like that. All right. The transformer of the longevity space. And
Yeah, because we had a lot of torture. Let me be clear. This isn't like something where I haven't gotten beat up left and right when I first started. And even now, I'm sure you've experienced that too.
Yes.
In medicine.
But you continue to push forward, and you have an app that's out, and it's pronounced again, is it Grok?
Grok Health.
Yep.
And talking about its origins, it comes out of a book called, my favorite book in the world, Stranger in a Strange Land, which was about a trip to Mars. I read it years ago. I was a child and multiple times. And the word grok means this, and that's why I liked it. It means understanding with intuition and empathy. And I feel like compassion and intuition have played a huge role in my ability to read biomarkers and to put together patterns that, in fact, I've now been told is AI. So our data is based on those clinical connections. If this, then that. If this combination, then maybe it's, something else. And now AI can take that from me and actually do it far faster with many more molecules, because we're into the thousands of molecules. And at some point, you can't make those connections that way. And with genetic variants, looking at what your genes express, that's really critical. We know that. In fact, this is where I've come as of studies I did when I launched Grok Health in 2020, just starting with a beta 1, and now we're in the beta 2, and we're actually selling it to companies where through a virtual app, we can tell you the choices that you need to make. And what I realized is every single one of us is on a path to a disorder of carbohydrate metabolism, to come full circle, because that to me is what diabetes is. And it's connected to almost every serious chronic disease that will emerge in everyone if we live long enough, even people beyond 100, to the extent they can live well with a chronic disease. But now in this country, I think it's, 6 out of 10 Americans have one chronic disease and 4 out of 10 have 2. And I think that's an understatement from what I see. So I think everyone is on a path to mismanage sugar. The reason being is food is plentiful. Maybe it's not the right food, but it's plentiful. In the eras of feast and famine, even going back to our predecessors who were cavemen and cavewomen, in order to survive, those who had genes that allowed them to put on fat during the good months of summer, but then live off of it when there was no more berries to pick and animals were hibernating, meant that they survived. So those are the genes we all inherited. And now we're living longer because antibiotics came into play in the mid-20th century. So life expectancy shot up in the mid-1950s. Really, that's when antibiotics were first introduced, actually at Yale. They were put in use, and a doctor's wife saved her life from urinary sepsis. And then ultimately we're living longer, but the great generation has been a great experiment in living longer, but not healthy. So here's where the baby boomers, and why I started on that path, because I believe if we can own our own future health, or what I think of as own your health destiny, we can turn that and stop genes from expressing. And actually, I've seen it. I've seen the fact that by using, for example, semaglutide or Ozempic, we've turned off switches in people who have a propensity for metabolic syndrome and would run 50 marathons and still put on weight. So I am fortunate, and I feel very grateful that I have the ability to work with people individually at the center to be able to have them own their future health trajectory and stop disease in its tracks. So we have 60 and 70-year young people who look 20 and 30 years younger, and biologically, they're reversing. And I feel like it should be for everyone, and that's what Grok Health is. I feel like if we can deliver medicine virtually and pour in the right, real medical knowledge and wisdom, not just the facts, but how to interpret it, we can help everybody make the right choices, whether it's fasting, the Mediterranean diet, or eating a certain selection of food that goes along with what you like and what you know is good for you.
So beautiful. And I love how you wrap that all up. Before I ask you my last question, how do people find out more about you, your work, and if they wanted to be a client, how do they connect?
So the best way to do that now, because we've become more active posting and all of that, is at Dr. Florence Comite, Dr. Florence Comite, and I'm sure you'll have my name up so they can spell it, in Insta, in X, in Twitter. Yeah, that's X right now. Yes. Yeah. Okay. And also on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. Feel free to follow. We also have at Comite Center and at Grok Health. We are redoing, the website is now a couple of years old, and we're working on how we're going to present it to the public. There is a sign up in Grok, www.grokhealth.com, for a wait list. It's been off the last couple of months. We're not sure why. So possibly the best way to do it for those people with Androids is actually they're able to go right into and get the Grok Health app. We're not signing them in yet. We have a wait list of thousands, and we can't manage that just yet. And that would probably be the best way to go, to sign up through grokhealth.com on the wait list, or if you have an Android, to go to Google Play and sign up there. Unfortunately for the iPhone, it's still by invitation only, and we're not sending out invitations right now. But if you get on a wait list or you let us know you're interested through posts, through at Dr. Florence Comite, you will have your name added to the wait list.
That's beautiful. And wow, I'm really curious to get the answer to this last question. You've certainly lived a life of service and have explored the different realms of healing. What has been your best medicine?
Sleep. I can put a story behind that, but I really do believe in the 20 years I flipped from thinking it was exercise, food, sleep, to sleep, food, exercise based on data. For example, we recommend an Aura or a Whoop or any way of monitoring so we can help people understand what's missing. Mm-hmm. And I myself went through plasmapheresis as a test because I curate for what's out there. I found it fascinating. In working with Ryan, I did plasmapheresis, which is exchanging your blood and then putting back the red blood cells and cleaning up the plasma of cytokines, which are negative inflammatory molecules. And I found out in the first 3 months of doing that exchange, my biological age reversed by 15 years.
Wow.
Then I was creating the app, which was my undoing, okay? So in order to do it, this is what happened when I wrote the book, Keep It Up, 10 years ago. I lost sleep. And if I slept 4 hours a night, that was a good night. So for 3 months, I slept 4 or less hours a night from August, September to December or November, whatever that 3-month window was. And my age bumped up even higher, my biological age. So the good news is that it's dynamic and you can actually make changes at any stage of life. The bottom line, though, is sleep is invaluable. It's probably priceless. And I think more people suffer from poor sleep than from obesity. And obesity is up there. And poor sleep actually contributes to disease in a major way. And they have lots of studies on that. When you don't sleep adequately, and when I say adequately, I use a window of 6 to 8 hours. I think less than 6 can be detrimental. More than 8 is fine. And a lot of people who find that they have lost sleep when they start making up sleep and in whatever way they figure it out, and it's one of my hopes that we can do that through Grok Health, they actually feel more tired for a while as their body adapts. I know I did. I know a lot of my clients and patients do. So sleep to me is paramount.
Dr. Florence, I applaud you for the work that you have done in the longevity space and for sharing your time and wisdom with us today on the Thrive State podcast.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if you're finding that this content is really helping you and your family members, please consider supporting our mission and our cause of elevating health, happiness, and human potential for people all over the world. You can do so by making sure that you subscribe to this podcast, sharing it with your friends and family members, and leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. All these things are going to really help elevate the show and to give us the resources to continue to bring more content just like this to yourself as well as the people that you love. If you haven't already, you might want to consider joining our community. We actually have a community where people get to engage with me in group sessions where we do breathwork, meditation, where we do challenges together, really to be able to get us access to health, happiness, human potential, so that we could have longevity and performance in our life as well. You can check out our community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. And if you haven't already, pick up a copy of my book, Thrive State. It really gives you all the tools, the pillars that you need to create a blueprint to control the energetics of your life. Who are you? How you show up in the world? The choices that you consistently make create an energy in your body, and you can control this. And when you can control that, you also control the messages you give to your DNA that gives you access, again, to optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. And let me also just share a free gift to you. If you haven't already, please pick up my longevity and performance bundle where I share lecture notes, ebooks, breathwork exercises, and longevity and performance resources at thrivestatestarter.com. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. Thank you for helping us grow. Remember always, my friends, that you are your best medicine.